I'm Richard C. Corner, and I'm sitting here in a chair to try to tell you a little something about my life, and I hope that it'll be interesting and short, but it probably won't. So let's begin about 1936, when we moved from just a couple of blocks from where we live right now on 46th Street, Northwest 46th in Classen, and we moved over to the east side of town where the OU complex is now. They tore down all of those buildings in that area, and before they did, we lived there. And we lived on a second story of a building, and I heard things through the radio, and I said, you know, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be able to put my voice through the radio. I wonder how I can do that. So I had a headphone, and why I had a headphone, I'll never know. But I went into the back of the radio phonograph that we had and began to touch a couple of bare wires to different things. Well, I got shocked terribly a couple of times, but I finally got on the top of a tube and a ground wire, and all of a sudden, voila, I could hear myself through the radio voice, through the speaker. And that just whet my appetite to do something through that radio. So moving along, and we'll try to make this short as possible, we moved to Edmond, and I began to do a lot more things with the microphone, which turned out to be an earphone, really. That's all a microphone is an earphone, except it's better and built differently. But anyway, the gist of that was I began to talk through the radio, and then I wanted to be able to play music. 78 records. We had a pretty nice collection of music, and some way or another I fooled around and I got the phonograph to play through it along, and I could talk over the top of the records. Well, without today's modern boards or anything, I was talking and playing music through the radio when I was 11 years old. And all of this just kept building through the years, you know, and okay. That also whets your appetite to hear yourself, and my dad had bought a recording machine with the radio phonograph that we had, so we could make records at my house. So we would put the band in my house on Littler, 715 South Littler, and play and make records. We didn't make many, and they were glass-based, and they broke all the time because of the war, which I'll bring in later. So let's go back just a little bit. When we moved to Edmond, I went to grade school. That would be the 4th and 5th grade, I believe. Then I went to junior high school, which would be 6 and 7, and then 2 years, 8 and 9, for the high school. The high school is where the band got started, and I had quite a following of young ladies, by the way. I had, usually when I went home, 3 or 4 of those giggly ladies were following me. They came home to hear me play the piano. Now that's kind of bragging, I think, and I shouldn't do that perhaps. So we've gotten ourselves along pretty well, and in the process, you know, I left out one important thing. Early on, before I could talk through the radio, I did rig up 2 tin cans and a string, and I had my mother at one end of the string with the can, and I had the other one, and we tried to talk to each other through two tin cans, as you will see now in the Progresso commercials for soup that they're advertising on the television now. So my dad said, well, we're going to get you in down to OU and you can be a geologist. So I enrolled in the geology school and didn't do too well with it because it wasn't long that I found out that I was partially colorblind. And to be partially colorblind would not be a good thing to have, because you have to see the hues in rock, like pinks and reds and things. And those colors I didn't see well. So I had a perfect opportunity to say I couldn't be a geologist. Ha ha. So I weaseled out of that deal. Quite by accident, really, because I enrolled in a course at OU, a 2-hour course in speech, and I perhaps was the first person to ever bring a wire recorder to class with my project. I recorded my project on wire recording and presented it to the class, which was quite nice, and the teacher, blew her away. And then I met Dr. Lawton at the school. It was next door to where we were having the speech classes, and I enrolled in beginning radio courses. That's where you write a story and then you produce it, and you produce those things for radio. And he thought I had a talent in that. So he gave me a letter that allowed me, even though I had only been in the school a year, to take any course that was on the curriculum at the university, whether I had the prerequisites or not. He said, you can enroll in anything you want, Richard. So quite a wonderful, wonderful man, Dr. Sherman P. Lawton. And I went along in the radio school and did quite well, and we built the first carrier current radio station in this part of the country. There were 6 of us that built a radio station, and they gave us one of the production rooms so that we could play the records, and they could have all this practice of broadcasting. We had a little broadcasting station. We sold advertising, and we made $1,000 our first summer. We made a profit, and we were thrilled. And a lot of people came to see our setup, and even people from other cities came to see us because we were doing something quite unique. Now, carrier current, perhaps I should explain that. Carrier current rides on the outside of a wire. So if you put a transmitter in a coupling action to a wire, it will run through like electric wires, telephone wires, anything that has a copper wire in it. And it would become a way for people to listen to us on the radio at 590 KUVY. And this little station went on for years down at OU and finally turned into KGOU, which is now the National Public Radio Station. So those are some of the interesting things, but let's digress just a bit now. For me, I had an opportunity. Dr. Sherman P. Lawton decided that it would be good if I had some practical experience in real radio. So he helped me get a job in Clovis, New Mexico, KCIA. Yeah, it was I don't know, 1,000-watt full-time AM radio station, and I worked there for, I don't know, 6 months or something, and we were involved in being adjacent to the Atomic Energy Commission, doing all of this nuclear bomb experiments. They were, blowing up these bombs in Nevada. And my parents found out about it, and they got in the car and drove out and said, "You're coming home." So I gave the guy, Mr. McAllister, and he was very sweet, gave him 1 day's notice and left. And we came back home. I enrolled in Oklahoma City University and picked out a curriculum of business administration and economics, and went to school there and graduated in 1952 with a bachelor's degree. It's 1948, and it's in the summer, and there's a new station in town at 1140 on the AM dial, KLPR. And here was a station that I might be able to work for. So I went to the people, the powers to be at KLPR. They were in Capitol Hill, that's South Oklahoma City, on Southwest 29th Street, where their offices, and the radio part was out on the highway down by Moore, Oklahoma. So I went in, and they said, "Well, we can't pay you anything, but if you want to write copy, and that's writing commercials, we'll give you a job this summer and see how you work out, and if you work out, we'll put you on the payroll in the fall." So I went there every day, rode the streetcar to South Oklahoma City, to Capitol Hill, and wrote copy. I had 100 accounts that I wrote for. And I bought a lot of magazines on my own. I bought my own lunch. They furnished me nothing except a typewriter and some paper. And I got lots of experience. And it was a great radio station. And they had a man that was on in the noon hour and the early part of the afternoon, Grant Ladd. And he had quite a following, a real big following, in fact. And it's ironic because in later years, I turned out to hire a Grant Ladd. But in the meantime, I had been doing a bit of skullduggery because I found out there was an FM radio station that the Oklahoma City school systems owned, which was KOKH-FM. So I went up there, and I just fell in love with the surroundings, especially the fact that they were also daytime programming for KETA TV Channel 13, which is now the OETA. So I was running the FM station, I ran the camera and did some directing for the Channel 13 programming. And in the meantime, KOKH TV came about from the Board of Education finding out the people wanted to sell the now dark KTVQ, which was Channel 25, and it was located in the Victoria building at 18th and Classen. So this station was shut down, and the school board bought it, and we came back on the air as an educational station with Channel 25, KOKH TV. And so I was working for 2 television stations and a radio station for quite a time. And in those days, I was able to break my work schedule up to 3:15 in the afternoon, because most of the programming was between 3 and 4. So I left the broadcasting center at 18th and Ellison at 3:15 and dashed out to the transmitter site where KWTV Channel 9 is now. We had a building of our own back there. And we broadcast from 4 till about 9 o'clock in the evening. So I went out there to work those hours. And now I was working for 3 daytime jobs and then 1 evening job. And I learned about the board, wanting to expand everything, and that was when they brought Bob Allen into the picture. And that was the time for me to leave and take another job that I had been offered from the First National Bank. They wanted to build an FM station. The people at Video Independent Theaters had a permit to build an FM station. And I don't know whether it was Mr. Griffin or somebody like that was killed in an airplane crash, so they never built the station. So they said, if you will build an FM station, we'll give you the building permit to the First National Bank. So they bought it for $1 from Video Independent Theaters. It was quite an experience because I had also been working for Video Independent Theaters, programming their radio station in Tulsa. They had a radio station over there on FM, and I was making the tapes for them at Soundworks in Oklahoma City. And I thought that was interesting that all of that came about. So here we are finally building our own FM station, the first FM stereo station in the state of Oklahoma, 3,300 watts in the First National Bank. It was titled as the First National Foundation, which was in essence a nonprofit area, but it wouldn't have hurt to make some money too. Our station did quite well. We had a wonderful following. We had a first-class radio station, and I was the manager of it, and what a pleasure it was to offer Oklahoma City such wonderful entertainment. So, that was in 1962, in March 16th, 1962, when we went on the air with the first stereo station, KFNB-FM. So then, 2 years later, in 1964, we applied for a permit to have 100,000 watts. They were now authorizing 100,000 watt stations with our frequency of 101.9. So we built a new radio station with 100,000 watts. And in the process, they also allowed you to have vertical and horizontal polarization, as they called it. So we ran 100,000 watts vertical and 100,000 watts horizontal. We had two 20 kilowatt Collins transmitters. They were brand new, state of the art, and it was quite interesting. We had a beautiful, beautiful sound out of those great transmitters and that good coverage. As this station was built, I must say I have to digress for just a moment by saying in 1963, a friend of mine, George Kravis in Tulsa, decided he wanted to build an FM station, and he was a friend of mine when we were all at the Class and Broadcasting Center. So I went over, I left KFNB for about 9 months or 12 months and went over and built the first 20,000 watt FM station, KRAV, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then I came back to our station over here, KFNB in '64, and that's when we built the 100,000 watts. So that brings me up to date on that subject. Some of the people that were involved in the radio station, as well as several that came through and were interviewed for programs on the station. I mentioned Grant Ladd being a person of interest from KLPR days of 1948. He applied for a job with me in 1962, and I was lucky enough to get him. He had a wonderful voice, and people knew who he was, and so I had Grant Ladd. We reconnected after all of those years, and it was a wonderful experience. But let me say, Virgil Sprankle was the building manager of the radio station. Of the building, but he was also the president of the corporation for the radio station. Then we had Clarence Deal, who had been the chief engineer for KOKH-FM and the television station. So we had those two folks and myself, the three of us put the station together. Some of the people that worked with us were Terry McGrew from WKY, Tom McCoy. Tom McCoy came from several radio stations, including KYFM, which was a competitor some years prior to that. We had, of course, Grant Ladd and many others that came along. Now let's talk for just a moment about some of the exciting things that came through the door with us. Almost always when there was some kind of a function, we would interview people like Arthur Fiedler from the Boston Pops was in our studio for an interview. I interviewed Wanda Jackson. She also came out to my house on Classen and recorded on my kind of broken down recording machine to make a test to send to somebody to try to get a recording contract. Also, Ginger Rogers came through and was interviewed by Ted Ebright, another one of our stars of people at KFNB. Let me see if I can think of some others. We had Barbara Streisand's sister, Rosalind Kind, that came by. I interviewed John Denver, and he autographed an album for me. Let's see, who else? Don Knotts. I interviewed Don Knotts in the press club. He was quite an interesting person to be around, as well as Harv Presnell from Paint Your Wagon. We recorded him over in the basement restaurant at the Skirvin Hotel. One of the surprises that I had at KFNB one afternoon was these three ladies walked in and they were promoting their new movie, and it was showing at the Tower Theater. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the movie. I remember that one of the girls was Tippi Hedren, and I cannot remember the other two ladies, but they were quite bosomy, and you may perhaps get to see a picture of them at some point. But throughout the years that I was at KFNB, we had very, very many interesting people that came by, people from the symphony. We we were a good station. We played classical music, we played popular music, folk music. Our programming was set up to play a lot of things and a lot of different kinds of things. So the format in the evening had a full hour of classics, and on Friday night we used to broadcast live from, and I can't remember the name of the place, but it was folk music and it was live. It was up on, seems like to me it was up on Walker. Anyway, this diversion has brought me to the point that we decided to take KFNB and make it a classical music station. We called it 101 Stereo at that time. And we played classical music and semi-classics and light popular music. And we had a program guide which I put out each month that showed any kind of classical music that we had. We had a morning program from 10 to noon, and then we had a noonday concert. We had an afternoon and an evening concert, and in between we would play light popular music, something like beautiful music that would fit nicely with classics. So it was quite interesting to send this program guide out. Our listeners would write in and we'd add them to our list, and we had quite a nice list, several thousand people that asked for the guide. It did not make us any money, and eventually we had to drop the classics, and at that time we went to a beautiful music format which was programmed out of the Hancock Center in Chicago, called Today's Beautiful Music. Well, Today's Beautiful Music put us on the map. We only had one competitor, and that was KKNG. They were doing the very same thing we were, but two of us were fierce competitors of each other. And we did quite well, and they did quite well. With Today's Beautiful Music, we made a name for ourselves. And at that point, the sales were not what they should be, so the foundation which we were under decided to sell the radio station. And the person that purchased it was Clint Murkison, who owned the Dallas Cowboys. So he bought the station and it had to be cash. It couldn't be anything else. They had to deliver cash by wire. And they did that. And out of that transaction, Ken Dow and his family came to Oklahoma City to change the call letters from KFNB to K-Lite, KLTE, and we changed it to KI, I don't know how it was, but it was K-Lite, and that's what everybody remembered. We were the light. And we had a wonderful radio station. We had fun things on. We had funny little jokes things in the mornings on our morning program. We had our own airplane that we did traffic with. We had Randy Kemp was in the airplane every morning, and we had Pam Finn, who had a very nice afternoon program. She was one of our highlight people for the ladies in that area. We had 2 or 3 ladies work for us as announcers, plus a guy by the name of Williams. Can't remember his first name, but he was quite talented, fun, and Ray Ackerman Jr. Did a lot of funny things, including his imitation of Julia Child. That was very, very good. I should take time to mention Ken Dow and his family coming to town to run the radio station and direct the programming into such marvelous things that this man could do. He's internationally famous for pulling radio stations out of the red into the black and making lots of money, including our station. We did quite well. Sales were good, and Ken was very much fun to work for. He's a talented man. He's the kind of a guy that's an innovator in all aspects. He was a fun person to work with, let me tell you. And his family was wonderful too. His wife's name was Dottie, and Dottie was our bookkeeper. So she came to work every day to work on the books and also help on a new type of computer that we had. It was on a great big 16-inch disc, and it wasn't very good, and it finally crashed, and we had quite a time reconstructing everything to run it manually until we got something else to take its place. So anyway, we trudge along with good programming and good money, and everybody was paid well. And Clint Murkison became ill, even though Clint Murkison never set foot at K-Lite radio, not even once did he ever come up. He just bought it and gave it to Ken to run. So Ken sold a radio station very quietly. I was the only person that knew that the station was for sale. The rest of them were guessing that it might be, but they didn't know for sure, but I knew it was being sold. So it was sold, and I don't know who the name of the people were, but it was changed to Cool Radio. And after Cool came along, I guess I gave a cool leave, because I left and Ken Dow left Oklahoma City. But during this period of time that Ken was here, and some years before, Soundworks did a lot of business with all of the notable people around town. I could turn 300 commercials on tape to an agency overnight, and nobody in town could do that. So I became the dub king of Oklahoma City, and I worked for Ackerman, I worked for Low Runkle, Ross Cummings, and many other good agencies, and also for Glenn Bozell Jacobs. They owned the contract with the bank through the years and did their advertising for them. So even prior to those days, when I was associated with many people there in the building with John Spence, who was one of their producers and writers, and he turned out fabulous commercials, and I did his audio work for him, and he put those together at WKY-TV, which was quite unique, because in those days it was difficult to transition from one scene to another, and John had a way to do it that made it look beautiful. Did a beautiful job. So now we're out of Cool, which I really only did one little project for them. But I do want to mention some of the radio stations that may not have come to mind. KWHP was a station in Edmond, Oklahoma, and Bill Payne owned that. He did a nice job and eventually sold the station. There was a station called KAFG that later became KJOY, or KJYO. It's been around a long time in a lot of different formats. There was KYFM. I don't know what it became. But Tom McCoy worked for them, and he also worked for me. And in mentioning Tom McCoy working for KFNB, and I forgot to mention this. He later became one of the FCC people in Washington. He worked for the Federal Communications Commission. I thought that was quite nice, and a very talented person at that. This section of our talk is on Soundworks Corner Incorporated. Actually, this came about in a couple of ways, but let me digress just a little bit to show you how Soundworks evolved. From 1957 up to the present, even now, Soundworks has operated as an independent studio, and my first recording machine I bought at Trice Wholesale and borrowed the money for it at the credit union when I was at the Class and Broadcasting Center. I recorded percussion concerts. I recorded many people in political situations. I did a lot of recording over at the First Presbyterian Church. I built my studio in the building behind where I live at 4905 North Classen Boulevard. And we have a studio where we have about 4 people. So it's called a voice-over studio. It's not a studio that you record bands or anything like that. So it's quite interesting to see how I had almost every notable person in town come through. I had David Boren recorded in the studio, George Nye, many people from the political areas. I just couldn't name them all, hundreds of them probably, as well as working for agencies, doing commercials. I'd like to talk just a minute about my parents. I had their backing and their love and everything that went with anybody that wanted to really succeed in business. And I did have to try, if that's not the rest of the sentence. So, as my mother had passed away, my dad was on his last few moments. I did get to see him, and I'd gotten a call from Virginia Dunaway at the Low Runkle Company. They had been away from me for a period of time where I wasn't getting their business. And she called and she said, "Would you like to have our account back?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I would." So I went to tell my dad, and I told my dad, "Don't worry about me, because I'm gonna make it. I've got the Runkle account again. I just got it today, and I'm getting ready to start to work for him tomorrow. So you don't have to worry about me not having enough of anything." So I'm set, and my business would be good from then on. And of course it was. It just kept growing and growing and growing. I did quite well. I'll not mention figures, but I did quite well for an independent studio.